Thank you to the National Skills Coalition for having me at your 2021 Skills in the States Forum. The focus of this year's forum, how state workforce development strategies can advance racial equity and economic justice, is so timely. I appreciate your leadership in putting it front and center, as workforce leaders such as yourselves are going to be essential in supporting this country's economic recovery. And what we know is that we will recover. America will. Industries will come back. Indeed, we've already seen that happen when things in the pandemic got better, right? When COVID cases seemed under control. And this will mean jobs. But recovery is only half of the equation. Equity is the other half. And we have to be intentional about this or it's not going to happen. There can be no sustainable recovery without equity. This is a lesson that economic history has taught us time and time again. And equity means both good jobs and who gets those jobs. Or put another way, equity forces us to ask who will be left behind. For far too long, even when our economy was at its most prosperous, we have not had equity. The opportunity, income, and wealth gaps between Black Americans and white Americans have widened. Latinx workers and Indigenous workers similarly face inequities, as do several Asian Pacific Islander ethnic groups. While a college degree is one equalizer, even there, the median wealth for Black families with a college degree is lower than that for whites without a college degree. These long-standing inequities explain why, by just about every measure, workers of color and women of color have been the hardest hit by COVID. During the pandemic, African Americans filed for unemployment insurance at much higher rates than all other groups. This means that access to UI is not just about providing a safety net for workers, it's about combating racialized poverty and systemic racial inequities. Over the last 2 years, we've all seen how essential workers who could not shift to telework were disproportionately workers of color, like care workers, like nurses in hospitals, caregivers in residential facilities, who are largely women, often Black women and other women of color. And those in our food chain, from farm workers to grocery clerks, warehouses to restaurant workers, we saw who bore the greatest risks. So enforcement of labor laws in industries and regions with high rates of wage theft is not just a worker rights strategy, it can be an important tool to achieve racial equity. I share all this because we know that Black workers in our country have faced long-standing structural barriers to economic equity and mobility. If we can intentionally orient our workforce solutions around confronting these barriers for Black workers, I believe we will also bring down barriers for all workers to access and keep a good job. Black, brown, Asian, LGBTQ, homeless or precariously housed, formerly incarcerated, disabled, poor white, urban, suburban, or rural. When it comes to reemployment, connecting workers to quality jobs in this recovery is now the challenge before us. If there was ever a time to be bold, this is it. This is a moment to reimagine what the workforce system can do. This is why the president is proposing historic investments in workforce development in his Build Back Better agenda. I want to spend a few minutes today sharing a bit about how this administration is taking critical steps on workforce development and how we will need your partnership on the ground to realize impact for communities across the country. The Build Back Better agenda calls for a historic investment of $100 billion over 10 years in workforce development. This historic investment will be guided by a set of 3 core principles. First, quality jobs. Orienting our workforce investment around supporting and growing good jobs is critical in industry sectors that are going to grow. The president knows, and this administration is committed to making sure that all of our other goals to rebuild America, including combating climate change and making infrastructure investments in roads, bridges, broadband, care, clean energy, and more, are also opportunities to create good jobs in the communities that need them the most. 2, racial equity. Combating the structural barriers to opportunity so all Americans have a fair shot to participate, whether it's transportation, childcare, or working with our employer partners to build inclusive workforces, Equity is at the center of our workforce agenda. And 3, partnerships between employers and workers. Quality job training is about bringing together employers across a sector, engaging worker voice, and forging close partnerships between labor and management. When employers and employees partner in shaping and investing in the skills of the American worker, and when the workforce development system invests in and supports such partnerships, workforce development becomes less about one-off courses and skills deficiencies of individual workers and more about building the bridge between people and good jobs. Across the country, states are investing workforce funds in innovative partnerships doing all 3, using labor management partnerships to train workers for quality jobs in an intentionally inclusive way. Like high road training partnerships in California, a model for this kind of work, where labor and management come together to commit to good jobs, often union jobs, assess the skills needed for those jobs, and build training programs together that not only meet current needs, but train for the future. States are also using innovative workforce partnerships to meet critical needs in their own workforce. Registered apprenticeships for early education workers in Pennsylvania are leveraging WIOA dollars to deliver programs that boost job quality, bringing the guarantees of apprenticeship to women of color and meeting a critical need for the state's economy. Putting equity and job quality at the center of how we build and support workforce partnerships that bring employees and employers together is critical. And these sector-based partnerships start with the jobs themselves, the jobs that are here now and the jobs that we know are coming, so that workers, including young workers, youth, are on a path to economic security and advancement. To make this work, we also must challenge ourselves to reassess how we measure success. So it's not just how many workers complete training or get placed that's primary. Success must also be measured by who we are serving and actual job outcomes. As excellent as education and training programs can be, they don't necessarily result in workers being placed or finding success in an actual job, let alone ensure that the jobs they get are good jobs. So we want to reorder the work to start with where the demand for jobs is and from a foundation where we invest in those who face the greatest barriers to employment. This changes how success is measured. And now is the time for us to fundamentally upend the traditional approach to workforce development. This is about not just building back, but building back better. The President, Labor Secretary Marty Walsh, and I, and the entire Department of Labor recognize that this transformative approach to workforce development demands investment in our states and our communities. So let me talk a little bit about what the President's Build Back Better workforce vision includes. It includes historic investments in sector-based training. Many of you are already innovating in this way, recognizing that training employer by employer doesn't make nearly as much sense as bringing together industries, that is, multiple employers with shared needs, along with educational partners and community-based organizations, developing training for a bigger pool of good jobs. Also, investments in registered apprenticeships. With this investment, we're going to work to make sure that apprenticeship reaches underrepresented populations, expands to more jobs and industries to realize a much expanded and stronger system that extends the guarantees and results of apprenticeship to more workers and students across our labor market. Also, investments in the workforce mission of our community colleges. The disconnect between educational institutions and skills needed for in-demand jobs is legendary. And many educational and workforce leaders are working to address this across the country. With the President's proposal, we're going to support strengthening partnerships between community colleges, the workforce system, and labor management partnerships to deliver high quality, connected training that aligns to regional labor market needs and good jobs. Also, historic investments in comprehensive and career services, investing in supports and wraparound services to ensure that workers can equitably access, navigate, and succeed in training. So no one drops out of a program because their childcare needs are too great or because they didn't have the transportation to get from home to training. And this will also include career counseling and guidance. And I should just also mention a permanent and expanded workforce investment program to support reentry. This builds on prior investments, but this administration is calling on Congress to establish a dedicated funding stream to support reentry of justice-involved individuals, including vulnerable youth, and going behind the walls to provide workforce services pre-release. And then to advance this workforce vision and realize the potential and sustainability of the investments within Build Back Better, we're also calling for the reauthorization of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or what we all know as WIOA, to mirror the priorities that I've already mentioned. I said at the outset that this work is timely, but the truth is it's long overdue. We are working hard with Congress to make these investments a reality, but we are not waiting. There's a lot of talk about infrastructure these days, and the workforce system is critical infrastructure. It's the bridges and roads connecting where people are, especially those who've been excluded from employment opportunities, with the quality jobs that they want and need, and frankly, that need them. We have two problems right now in our country. One, changes in our economy that have major impacts on industries that regions depend on, as well as critical supply industries and cutting edge companies where firms have had trouble filling those roles. And two, we have communities that have been systematically underinvested in and habitually locked out of good jobs. By focusing on connecting Americans from underserved communities to our most in-demand jobs, we can solve these two problems. We can use the two problems to solve each other. We can be morally and economically smart at the same time. We're working with our federal partners across agencies to ensure investments in core infrastructure are connected to workforce partners and our proposed training investments to ensure that these investments lead to good jobs and first and foremost create opportunities for the people living in communities where these hard infrastructure investments are most needed. Also, the president's FY22 budget asked for Congress to bolster the infrastructure of the public workforce system through an increased investment in workforce development by over $500 million. We're in the midst of awarding funds right now through careers grants for reemployment services for workers most impacted by the pandemic. In these grants, like all of our investments, we want to ensure these resources reach organizations at the community level, especially those who historically struggle to access these funds. When we announced the first group of awardees just last month, $6 million of the $22 million went to tribal communities. Again, we have to all be committed to leave no community behind. There is a lot of work to do, and we need your help to make this vision a reality. The truth is, I don't know if we will get all the funding the president wants. And part of the issue is many people are very critical of whether the workforce system can deliver in this time of need. So I end with a commitment and a challenge. My commitment to you is to do my part, that with Labor Secretary Marty Walsh and the Department of Labor as a whole, we're going to think boldly and act boldly to change the way we work, to fix what's broken, to measure what we do by the real impact we have on people's lives, including our ability to build bridges for people to good jobs they would otherwise not get or not even know about. My challenge to you is that you join us in a clear-eyed look at what works and what doesn't, and figure out what needs to be done differently to make the better in Build Back Better tangible and real and meaningful. The pandemic is a once-in-a-generation crisis that has presented the workforce development system with a once-in-a-generation opportunity to innovate and to get it right. We all have our part to do, so let's get to work. Thank you again for the invitation, and I look forward to meeting the challenges ahead with all of you.